We want to bring into the mix now Republican presidential candidate and Texas Senator Ted Cruz. Senator Cruz, I think everybody is wondering at a time like this, how should the U.S. respond? How would a President Cruz respond?
Well, John, thank you for having me. And first of all, our thoughts and prayers are with all of those who were killed, all of those who were injured in these horrific terrorist attacks today in Belgium. Our thoughts and prayers are especially for, we know there were several Mormon missionaries from Utah, Americans who were over there who were injured in those attacks. Our prayers are with those missionaries and with their families and with everyone who was affected by this attack. What we need and what we should be starting with is a president who acknowledges what this is. This was not a random act of violence. This was not disconnected. This was radical Islamic terrorism. We're at war. We are at war with ISIS, with radical Islamic terrorists who have declared jihad on Europe, declared jihad on America. They intend to carry out more and more and more of these terror attacks, whether Paris, whether San Bernardino, whether Brussels. And unfortunately, President Obama continues to embrace political correctness. He will not even name this enemy, much less do what is necessary to defeat it. And if I am president, we will defeat radical Islamic terrorism. We need a president who unleashes the full force and fury on ISIS and utterly destroys them. That's the only way to keep us safe.
Is the mood of the country ready for that? As you know, this president was elected in large part because he promised to withdraw the U.S. from the wars in the Middle East.
You know, the country is absolutely ready for a president who is willing to serve as commander-in-chief. You know, after every terror attack, we see President Obama go on television. And number one, because of absurd political correctness, he consistently refuses to say the words radical Islamic terrorism. So does Hillary Clinton. So does every member of this administration. But number two, he routinely lectures America on Islamophobia. This is idiocy. ISIS has declared their intention to wage jihad, to blow up and murder and shoot and kill as many Americans as possible, as many Europeans as possible. And this administration refuses to protect us. For example, the president is continuing to go forward with his plan to bring in tens of thousands of Syrian Muslim refugees. That makes no sense. We should halt that immediately because ISIS has stated its intention to infiltrate those refugees and to send terrorists to wage jihad here. And I think the American people are absolutely ready for a president who is serious about keeping America safe, and also for a president who stands with our friends and allies, stands with Europe. We are tired of a foreign policy that retreats from the world, that leads from behind. We have seen 7 years of weakness and appeasement from President Obama and refusal to confront our enemies, and enough is enough.
We know that some of the Paris attackers came in posing as refugees. So
yes.
What would your approach be? Let in only women, only men over a certain age? Let in nobody until there is some kind of vetting procedure?
So I have filed legislation in the United States Senate to suspend all refugees from countries where ISIS or Al-Qaeda control a substantial amount of territory, because the head of the FBI has told us they cannot vet these refugees. James Comey, the head of the FBI, appointed by Barack Obama, told Congress that it's impossible to vet these refugees because they don't have the database with the information on who is affiliated with ISIS and the terrorists. And so, as Comey put it, we can query the database until the cows come home. We don't have the basic information to determine who's a terrorist and who's not. Given that, the first obligation of the president is to be commander-in-chief and keep America safe. So, of course, we shouldn't be bringing refugees in. And if we keep doing so, we are going to see more terrorist attacks like San Bernardino, like Brussels, here at home, because our president is refusing to protect us. It is wrong, it is unconscionable, and it needs to change.
Salah Abdeslam, one of the organizers of the Paris attacks, who was just arrested the other day, was a Belgian national, born in Belgium.
Yes.
It is my understanding that under the visa waiver program, he could have jumped on a jet and flown to the United States. What is preventing ISIS from pulling off the same kinds of attacks here?
Look, you are absolutely right, and we need to seriously reconsider the visa waiver program. One of the causes of this terrible attack is that Europe's failed immigration policies have allowed numbers of radical Islamic terrorists to move to Europe to try to tear apart their culture and society from within. It is catastrophic. We're seeing Europe paying the price for disastrous immigration policies. The visa waiver program was based on a notion that a decade or two ago had a lot more basis, that we didn't have a serious threat from people coming from countries that are friends and allies, countries in Europe. With their immigration policies bringing so many radical Islamic terrorists into their countries, making them nationals of those countries, that poses a grave threat to Europe, but it also poses a grave threat to America, and we need to make sure everyone coming to America is properly vetted so that they are not a radical Islamic terrorist, so we do not see Americans being murdered exactly as happened in Brussels today.
Let me go back to this question of naming the enemy. You referred to it as radical Islamic terrorism. The president, in his remarks in Cuba earlier this morning, did not. As long as you are pursuing, as long as the FBI is pursuing ISIS or pursuing anybody who would do us harm, what does the name, what does the nomenclature matter?
Naming it is incredibly important. This is not simply a matter of semantics. The president's refusal to name our enemies impacts policy. So, for example, the president wants to bring in tens of thousands of Syrian Muslim refugees. He sees no threat there. Why? Because he will not acknowledge we're fighting radical Islamic terrorism. If you identify the enemy, then you don't implement policies that benefit the enemy. Likewise, the San Bernardino terrorists. The female terrorist had publicly posted on social media calls to jihad. And yet this administration refused to look at social media because of political correctness. They said, well, no, it's not right. If you recognize that you're fighting radical Islamic terrorism, every database you have. I might note, she also put on her visa application a fake address in Pakistan, a made-up address. And the vetting of the Obama administration failed to even notice that the address was fake and made up. If you're not willing to acknowledge what you're fighting, then, as we've seen with the Obama administration, you don't implement policies to defeat it. And likewise with ISIS. We need a president who will utterly defeat ISIS. If I am president, we will destroy ISIS. We will use overwhelming air power, carpet bombing ISIS into oblivion, taking out their infrastructure, their command and control, their communications, their transportation, their finance, the oil fields, taking out their personnel, arming the Kurds on the ground so they're boots on the ground, embedding our special forces, but putting them, before we put any troops in combat, getting rid of the rules of engagement that tie their arms behind their back and letting American soldiers fight and defeat the enemy. That's what a commander-in-chief focused on protecting America does, and sadly, we don't have a commander-in-chief doing that right now.
Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, where the city of Garland saw its own Islamic terror attacks.
Yes.